No, you don't have to worry about her, his mother said, not even lowering her voice. Girls like that usually find their place eventually. The room didn't go silent. It did something worse. It kept going, forks clinking against plates, someone pouring gravy, the low hum of polite conversation, like her words were nothing at all. But I heard them. I was already seated at the table when she said it. My hands rested calmly in my lap, fingers lightly folded the way my grandmother taught me years ago. I didn't look up right away. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where every pair of eyes was. And for just a second, just a flicker, I wondered if anyone would say something. My fiancé didn't. He cleared his throat, reached for his glass, and took a sip like he hadn't heard it. Or maybe like he had and chose not to. That was the moment everything inside me went still. Not hurt, not anger. Just still. I lifted my head slowly and smiled, soft and polite. "I'm sure I will," I said. His mother gave a tight little nod as if she'd just offered helpful advice instead of an insult. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just Thanksgiving dinner. It was a test. A few hours earlier, I had stood in front of my closet longer than I'd like to admit. Not because I didn't have anything to wear, but because I had too many choices. Tailored suits, silk blouses, dresses that cost more than most people's monthly rent, the kind of clothes that made people listen before you even spoke. I closed the door on all of it. Instead, I chose a simple cream sweater and a modest skirt, something soft, something forgettable, the kind of outfit that didn't demand attention or respect. I tied my hair back in a loose, low bun. No jewelry except a small pair of studs, no watch. Nothing that would give me away. When I stepped back and looked at myself in the mirror, I almost smiled. I looked like exactly what they expected. He picked me up just before sunset. "You look nice," he said, glancing over as I got into the car. Nice. Not beautiful, not striking. Nice was safe. "Thank you," I said. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually near the console. There was a comfort in his presence, something familiar that had drawn me in from the beginning. But that night I noticed something else too. Attention. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "A little," I admitted. "They're good people," he said quickly, "just traditional." Traditional. I'd learned over time that traditional could mean many things. Sometimes it meant warm, family-centered values. Other times, it meant a quiet hierarchy no one talked about out loud. "I'm looking forward to meeting them," I said. And I meant it. Just not in the way he thought. Their house sat at the end of a long, tree-lined street. The kind of neighborhood where everything was manicured just enough to feel effortless. Warm lights glowed through the windows. I could see movement inside, people gathering shadows crossing the dining room. "Ready?" he asked, turning off the engine. I nodded. He reached for my hand, gave it a quick squeeze, then led me up the walkway. The door opened before we even knocked. Finally, his mother said, stepping forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She hugged him first. Then she turned to me. "And you must be—" She paused as if searching for my name. I gave it to her gently. She repeated it, testing the sound, then stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon. Familiar, comforting. At least on the surface. Introductions came quickly. His father shook my hand firm and brief. His sister offered a polite nod. A couple of extended relatives smiled in that curious way people do when they're trying to place you. Dinner was already set. The table was long polished wood set with matching plates and neatly folded napkins. Everything looked precise. Intentional. I took the seat they indicated between my fiancé and his mother. Right across from his father. "Tell us about yourself," his mother said as soon as everyone settled. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. I smiled. "There's not much to tell. I work, I keep busy." "What kind of work?" his father asked. I paused just long enough to feel the weight of the moment. "Business," I said simply. He leaned back slightly. "What kind of business?" "Operations, management mostly." It wasn't a lie. Just incomplete. He nodded, though I could tell it didn't impress him. "And you enjoy that?" his mother asked. "I do." She gave a small, thoughtful hum. "Stability is important." There it was. Not a question. A judgment. The conversation moved on. Real estate. Investments. A neighbor who had just sold their property for far more than expected. I listened quietly, nodding when appropriate. They didn't ask my opinion, and I didn't offer it. At one point, his uncle mentioned a major deal, something about a company expanding into new markets. My company. He spoke about it with admiration, respect. They've got a strong CEO, he said. Smart woman, very disciplined. I kept my gaze on my plate. That's rare, his mother added. Women in those positions tend to lose focus. A small ripple of agreement moved around the table. I took a sip of water and stayed silent. Do your parents live nearby? His sister asked suddenly. No, I said, they're gone. A brief pause. Oh, she said, I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. That part at least was true. And how did you manage after that? His mother asked. There it was again. Not concern. Assessment. I worked, I said. I figured things out. She studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. Resilience is important, she said, but so is direction. I smiled politely. I agree. By the time the main course was served, I understood something clearly. They had already decided who I was, and nothing I said, at least not tonight, was going to change that. But I hadn't come to change their minds. I had come to see them clearly. And I was. Every word, every glance, every silence. Even the ones that came from him. Especially those. When his father made that joke about people marrying up just to survive, the table laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. I lowered my eyes and let out a small, polite smile. And beside me, my fiancé said nothing. Not a word. That was when the last piece settled into place. Not with a crash, but with a quiet, undeniable certainty. I folded my napkin neatly beside my plate and looked around the table. At the polished wood, the carefully prepared meal, the family that believed they understood everything about me. And I felt something shift. Not anger. Not even disappointment. Just clarity. And that's when I realized this wasn't just dinner, it was a test. I didn't always live quietly. People tend to assume that when they look at me now, simple clothes, modest apartment, no visible signs of success, that I've always been this way, that I came from something small and stayed there. The truth is, I chose this. But that choice didn't come all at once. It came after years of noise. Years of rooms where people talked over each other, trying to be the loudest voice at the table. Years of deals made in glass offices where everyone smiled too quickly and trusted too little. Years of watching how differently people treated you depending on what they thought you were worth. By the time I became CEO, I had already learned one thing very clearly. Respect in most places was rarely about who you were. It was about what people believed you had. And once I saw that, I started stepping back. Not from my work. I still ran the company. I still made every major decision, still carried the weight of hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in responsibility. But from everything else. The appearances, the expectations, the constant need to prove something. I simplified my life. A smaller place, fewer things, clothes that didn't announce anything before I spoke. At first, people in my circle didn't understand. You've worked too hard to live like this, one of my former colleagues told me once, looking around my apartment like something was missing. But nothing was missing. For the first time in years, things felt quiet. And I realized I liked that. I met him not long after that. It wasn't at a gala or a business conference. It wasn't anywhere impressive. It was at a bookstore. I remember it clearly because I had gone there on a weekday afternoon thinking it would be empty. I had a habit of doing that, choosing times when I could move through the world without being noticed. He was standing in the aisle, holding a book in one hand, reading the back cover like he couldn't quite decide. We reached for the same copy at the same time. He laughed first. Sorry, he said, you take it. It's okay, I replied. You had it first. We went back and forth like that for a moment until he finally smiled and said, how about this, we both buy it, and whoever finishes first gets to tell the other if it was worth it. It was a simple conversation. No tension, no expectations, and for once no one knew who I was. We talked for a few minutes more, about books, about how rare it was to find time to read properly. He asked what I did. I hesitated just for a second. Business, I said. He nodded, satisfied with that. And that was the beginning. Our relationship grew slowly. We met for coffee, then dinner, then long walks that stretched into conversations about everything and nothing. He was kind. Not in a performative way, not the kind of kindness that needed to be seen or acknowledged. Just steady. He listened when I spoke. He remembered small details. He showed up when he said he would. After years of dealing with people who were always calculating something, what they could gain, what they might lose, it felt different. It felt real. And I didn't want to complicate that. There was a moment early on when I almost told him. We were sitting at a small diner, the kind with chipped mugs and a waitress who called everyone Han. It was late. The place was nearly empty. A couple at the next table was arguing quietly about money. He glanced over, then back at me, shaking his head. I don't think I could ever be with someone like that, he said. Always talking about money status. It changes people. I didn't respond right away. He went on. I mean, I've met women like that. High-powered, always busy, always calculating. It's like they forget how to just be normal. He smiled at me then. You're not like that. There was no malice in it. Just an assumption. A belief. And in that moment I had a choice. I could correct him. Or I could let him keep seeing me the way he did. I chose the second. Not because I was hiding, but because for once I wanted to know what it felt like to be valued without explanation. Over time, though, small things began to surface. Not in him at first. In his family. He would tell me stories, casual offhand remarks about dinners, gatherings, things his parents had said. They're just old-fashioned, he'd say. They like things a certain way. I didn't think much of it. Until I heard the patterns. Comments about good families, about background, about people who know how to carry themselves. Nothing overt. Nothing you could point to and say that's the problem. But enough to make me wonder. The first time I met them briefly, just a short visit, nothing formal, I noticed the way his mother looked at me. Not unkind. Just measuring. As if she were trying to place me into a category she already understood. I smiled. I answered her questions simply. She didn't ask many. So when he invited me to Thanksgiving, I paused. It wasn't hesitation. It was consideration. Thanksgiving to me had always been more than just a meal. It was one of those rare times when people let their guard down or revealed who they really were when they thought they didn't need one. Families showed themselves at that table. The good and the difficult parts. And I realized something. If I went as I truly was, if I walked in with everything visible, then I would never know how they treated someone without it. So I made a decision. I would go as my simplest self. No titles, no signals, no hints. Just me. Or at least, the version of me they were most likely to underestimate. I didn't think of it as a test at first. Not consciously. It was more like curiosity. A quiet question I wanted answered. How do people treat someone when they believe there's nothing to gain? That question stayed with me as I stood in my closet that afternoon. As I chose the cream sweater, the modest skirt. As I tied my hair back. As I looked in the mirror and saw someone who could easily be overlooked. And now sitting at that table listening to his mother's voice, his father's comments, the subtle shifts in tone when they spoke to me. I had my answer. But answers I've learned don't always come all at once. Sometimes they unfold slowly. In small moments. In the things people don't say. I glanced at my fiancé, watching the way he avoided my eyes, the way he laughed just a second too late at his father's jokes. He wasn't cruel. That would have been easier to understand. He was comfortable. Comfortable enough to let it happen. And that somehow mattered more. I reached for my glass, taking a small sip of water, and let the conversation continue around me. They still didn't know who I was. But I was beginning to understand exactly who they were. And more importantly, who he was when it mattered. I didn't go there to prove anything. I just wanted to understand who they really were. The turkey was carved with quiet precision like everything else in that house. His father stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest effort without discomfort. He handled the knife confidently, slicing each portion, evenly placing them onto plates in a steady rhythm. No one spoke much while he worked. It felt ceremonial. I watched hands folded loosely in my lap, waiting until my plate was passed down to me. "Thank you," I said softly. He gave a brief nod, already focused on the next cut. The conversation picked up again as dishes were passed around. Mashed potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, each item placed carefully, each movement measured. It was the kind of dinner where everything looked right. But something underneath it all felt rehearsed. His mother turned to me again. So she said, her tone light but deliberate, "Do you cook?" There it was. A simple question on the surface. I smiled gently. Sometimes. I like it when I have the time. She tilted her head slightly. "It's important to make time," she said. "A home needs structure." I nodded. I agree. She studied me for a moment as if waiting for something more. When it didn't come, she looked away. Across from me, his sister leaned forward. "What kind of things do you make?" she asked. I could have answered with the truth about the private chef I occasionally hired for long weeks, or the rare evenings when I cooked simple meals just to feel grounded. Instead, I said basic things, nothing special. She smiled politely, but there was a flicker of dismissal in her eyes. "Everyone starts somewhere," she said. I smiled back. "Yes," I replied, "they do." The conversation shifted again. His uncle began talking about property values in the area, how certain neighborhoods were changing. His father added a comment about people moving in who didn't understand the standards. I listened quietly, noting the phrasing. It wasn't direct. It didn't have to be. His mother chimed in, "It's not about money, really. It's about mindset." There was a soft murmur of agreement around the table. I took a small bite of food, chewing slowly. Mindset. That word carried a lot of weight in rooms like this. At one point, my fiancé reached for the serving dish in front of me. "Here," he said, offering me more potatoes. "Thank you," I said. Our hands brushed briefly. I looked up at him just for a second. He smiled, but it was quick, distracted. His attention shifted back to the conversation almost immediately. Something in that moment stayed with me. Not what he did, but what he didn't. "Do you plan to keep working after you're married?" his mother asked suddenly. The question landed softly, but it carried an edge. I set my fork down carefully. "I haven't decided," I said. She nodded slowly. "It's good to think about those things ahead of time. Stability matters." His father added, "A household runs better when roles are clear." There was a pause, as if they expected me to agree. I offered a small, polite smile. "I'm sure it does," I said. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't even resistance. But it wasn't submission either. Just space. His sister leaned back in her chair, studying me. "You're very quiet," she said. "I like listening," I replied. She gave a small laugh. "That's rare." Maybe I said, "But you learn more that way." For a brief second, something in her expression shifted. Not quite respect, but acknowledgement. Then it was gone. The conversation turned once again to business. His uncle brought up the expansion deal, the same one from earlier. He spoke with admiration, describing the strategy behind it. "It takes discipline to pull something like that off," he said. "Whoever's running that company knows exactly what they're doing." His father nodded. "That's leadership. Not everyone has it." His mother added, "Especially not in today's world." She glanced at me briefly as she said it. The implication wasn't subtle. I kept my expression calm. "Yes," I said quietly, "it does take discipline." They didn't ask how I knew. They didn't think to. A few minutes later, his father made a remark that drew light laughter from the table. "Some people think marriage is a solution," he said, cutting another piece of turkey. "Find the right person, and suddenly everything's taken care of." A few heads nodded. "It doesn't work that way," he continued. "You can't build a life on dependency." The word hung in the air for a moment. Dependency. No one looked at me directly. But everyone understood. I lowered my gaze slightly, letting out a small, polite breath that could pass for a laugh. Beside me, my fiancé shifted in his seat. For a moment, I thought he might say something. He didn't. Instead, he reached for his glass again. That was when something inside me changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone else could see. But quietly. Like a door closing. I had come to observe. To understand. And now I did. It wasn't about one comment, or one moment. It was the pattern. The certainty in their voices. The way they spoke as if they already knew everything they needed to know. And the way he, someone I thought I understood, fit so easily into that space. "Would you like more?" his mother asked, gesturing to the dishes. "No, thank you," I said gently. "This is perfect." She nodded, satisfied. Across the table, his uncle continued talking about the deal. If I had the chance to meet that CEO, he said I'd ask her one thing. What's that? His sister asked. How she built that level of control, he said. That kind of focus doesn't come from nowhere. His father nodded. It comes from discipline and knowing your place. I looked down at my plate, then back up. For just a second I considered speaking, correcting them, telling them exactly who they were talking about. But I didn't. Not yet. Because the moment hadn't come. And more importantly, because I was still learning. The conversation softened slightly as dessert was brought out. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted, settling into something quieter. More comfortable. For them. I sat back in my chair, hands resting lightly on the table, and looked around. At the polished surfaces, the carefully chosen words, the subtle lines that divided people into categories they rarely questioned. And I understood something clearly. This wasn't cruelty. Cruelty would have been easier to recognize. This was something else. Something colder. Something quieter. Certainty. They weren't trying to hurt me. They simply believed they were right. And that belief shaped everything. I picked up my fork again, taking a small bite of dessert. Sweet, balanced, exactly as expected. Just like everything else in that room. I placed the fork down gently, and let the silence stretch for just a moment longer than necessary. Then I smiled. Soft, calm, unbothered. Because by then, I wasn't pretending for them anymore. I was deciding for myself. It wasn't cruelty, it was something colder, certainty. Dessert came out in careful portions, as if even sweetness needed structure in that house. Pumpkin pie sliced evenly, whipped cream placed with restraint, not indulgence. Coffee poured quietly, 1 cup at a time. The conversation softened on the surface, but I could feel the same current running underneath. Measured, controlled. Decided. I held the warm cup between my hands, letting the heat settle into my palms. His mother glanced at me again, her expression gentler now, almost thoughtful. You know, she said, it's good that you're adaptable. I looked up slightly. In what way? She smiled, the kind that suggested she was being kind. Not everyone starts with advantages, she said, but if you're willing to learn to listen, you can build a stable life. There it was again. Not harsh. Not loud. But certain. I nodded politely. That makes sense. She seemed pleased with that. Across the table, his father added, stability comes from discipline, from knowing where you stand. His uncle chuckled lightly, and not overreaching. A few quiet laughs followed. I lowered my gaze for a moment, letting the words pass through me without resistance. It wasn't new anymore. Just clearer. My fiancé finally spoke then. She's just still figuring things out, he said, glancing toward me briefly before looking back at his parents. She's not complicated. The words were simple, but they landed heavier than anything else that night. Not because they were cruel, but because they were final. A quiet definition of who I was, spoken without hesitation. I turned my head slightly, studying him for a moment. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to. Either way, something settled inside me. Not anger. Just understanding. His sister leaned forward again, curiosity returning now that the tone had softened. So, what do you want to do long term, she asked me, like realistically. I considered the question. There were many ways I could answer it. Plans, strategies, growth projections. But none of that belonged here. I want a life that feels steady, I said instead, where I can make decisions without pressure. She nodded slowly, as if translating my answer into something she understood. That's simple, she said. Yes, I replied, it is. But simplicity, I had learned, often looked different depending on who was looking. The conversation shifted again back to familiar ground. Business, markets, investments. His uncle brought up the expansion deal, once more, clearly impressed by the scale of it. I've been following that company for a while, he said. Whoever's running it is sharp. They don't rush decisions. His father nodded. That's what separates real leadership from the rest. His mother added, and from people who just drift. Her gaze flickered toward me again. I met it calmly. No reaction. No defense. Just presence. What kind of person do you think she is? His sister asked, referring to the CEO. His uncle smiled slightly. Focused, probably demanding. People at that level usually are. His father added, You don't get there by being soft. A brief silence followed. Then his mother said almost thoughtfully, But at least she understands her role. That word again. Role. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle before I swallowed. They admired her, respected her, spoke about her as if she represented something valuable. And yet, sitting right in front of them, I was everything they dismissed. Not because of who I was, but because of what they believed. Some people are just born into the right path, his father continued. Others need guidance. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. The assumption was already complete. Finished. Closed. I set my cup down gently on the table. The sound was soft, but it drew a few glances. Not concern. Just awareness. And that's when it happened. Not a dramatic moment. Not a sudden realization. Just a quiet shift inside me. Up until then, I had been observing, listening, waiting. But now something changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. Because I already had the answer. My fiancé leaned slightly toward me. Are you okay? He asked under his breath. I turned to him and smiled. Yes, I said. And I meant it. Because for the first time that evening, everything felt clear. Not confusing. Not uncertain. Just defined. His mother reached for her cup again, her tone softening further. If you ever need help, she said with direction, with opportunities, we have connections. It was meant to be generous, helpful, kind. I nodded slowly. Thank you, I said. And I let the words sit there without adding anything more. Across the table, his uncle returned to the topic of the company one last time. I'd be curious to know how she makes decisions under pressure, he said. That's where you see what someone's really made of. His father agreed. Exactly. Anyone can manage when things are easy. His sister added, It's when everything's uncertain that people show their true character. I looked at each of them one by one. Calmly. Carefully. And for a moment I almost spoke. Almost told them everything. Not to prove a point. Not to correct them. Just to end the assumption. But I didn't. Because something told me. The moment wasn't about them understanding me. It was about me understanding them. Completely. I folded my napkin, slowly placing it beside my plate. Not in a way that drew attention. Just deliberately. A small action. But one that marked the end of something. Not the dinner, but the uncertainty I had walked in with. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting the conversation continue around me. Their voices blended together, now familiar topics, familiar tones. Predictable. Comfortable. For them. But no longer for me. And in that quiet space, one thought settled clearly in my mind. They didn't see me as someone they needed to understand. They saw me as someone who needed to be shaped, guided, defined. And that belief? That quiet, unwavering certainty. That was the real answer? I lifted my glass once more, taking a small sip. Then I set it down. Gently. And looked back at the table with a calm, steady expression. Because at that point, I had already stopped pretending for them. Now I was simply deciding what came next. That's when I stopped pretending for them and started deciding for myself. The conversation drifted into something lighter after that. Someone mentioned a neighbor's new car. His sister laughed about a coworker who couldn't stop talking about her promotion. His mother asked if anyone wanted more coffee. On the surface, it looked like the evening had settled. But under it, I could still feel the same structure holding everything in place. The same assumptions. The same quiet hierarchy. I sat still, hands resting loosely near my plate, listening without really needing to. Because by then I wasn't gathering information anymore. I was finishing something. My phone vibrated softly against the inside of my bag. A small sound. Barely noticeable. But I felt it immediately. For a second I considered ignoring it. This wasn't the place for interruptions, not this kind. But then it vibrated again. And I knew what it meant. Urgent. I reached down calmly, slipping my hand into my bag and glancing at the screen. My assistant's name. Of course. I hesitated for just a moment. Then I looked up. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "I need to take this." His mother gave a small nod, though I could tell she wasn't entirely pleased. "Of course," she said. "Just be quick." I stood pushing my chair back quietly. No rush. No apology beyond what was necessary. Just a simple movement. I stepped into the hallway just outside the dining room. Not far. Far enough to be polite. Close enough that voices could still carry. I answered the call. "Yes," I said, my tone shifting without effort. It wasn't intentional. It just happened. "Good evening," my assistant said, her voice steady but urgent. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need a decision on the Westbridge expansion tonight. The board is split." I leaned lightly against the wall, eyes focused ahead. "What's the concern?" I asked. "Timing," she replied. "Half of them want to delay until Q2. The others think we should move now before the market shifts." I closed my eyes briefly, running through the numbers in my mind. Not guessing. Not estimating. Knowing. "How much exposure if we move forward now?" I asked. "Minimal," she said. "We've already secured most of the contracts. It's more about perception." Perception. I almost smiled at that. "Then we move forward," I said calmly. "We don't wait for consensus when the data is clear." A pause on the other end. "Then understood. Send the final terms to legal tonight," I added, "and schedule a follow-up with the board in the morning." "Yes, ma'am." I ended the call. For a second I stayed where I was. Not because I needed to, but because I understood what had just happened. Not the decision. That was routine. But the shift, the difference between who I was in that hallway and who I had been at that table. I stepped back into the dining room, and everything had changed. No one was speaking. Not because they were waiting for me, but because they had heard enough. Not everything. Just enough. I returned to my seat quietly. No one moved at first. Then his uncle cleared his throat. "That sounded important," he said carefully. I met his gaze. "It was work," I replied. My voice was calm again. Soft. But something about it had shifted. Not louder. Just clearer. His father leaned forward slightly. "What exactly do you do?" he asked. The same question as before, but this time it carried weight. Real interest. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I answered. "I run the company you were talking about." Silence. Not the polite kind. The real kind. The kind that settles in fully before anyone knows what to say. His sister blinked first. "Wait, what?" she said. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't need to. His uncle leaned back in his chair slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. "You mean, he started then stopped?" I gave a small nod. "Yes." His mother's hand stilled around her cup. Her eyes moved over me again. But this time it wasn't measuring. It was recalculating. "You're serious," she said. "I am." No emphasis. No pride. Just truth. My fiancé looked at me then. Really looked. As if he were seeing me for the first time. "You never told me," he said. His voice wasn't accusing. It was uncertain. I turned to him gently. "You never asked," I replied. The room stayed quiet. No one laughed. No one made a joke. No one tried to smooth it over. Because there was nothing to smooth. His father leaned back slowly, his earlier certainty gone. He started, then paused. Impressive. Unexpected. Difficult to place. He didn't finish the sentence. His uncle let out a small breath. "Well," he said almost to himself, "that explains a few things." His sister glanced between all of us, trying to find the right reaction. His mother said nothing. She simply watched. I picked up my fork again, taking a small bite of dessert. The same calm motion as before. Nothing dramatic. Nothing changed on the surface. But everything underneath it had shifted. No one asked for proof. They didn't need it. The call had been enough. The tone. The language. The certainty. My fiancé finally spoke again. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. The question lingered in the air. Not angry. Just searching. I set my fork down gently. And looked at him. "I wanted to see who you were without it," I said. No accusation. No blame. Just honesty. He nodded slowly, as if he understood, or at least was beginning to. Around the table, the energy had changed completely. Not warmer. Not yet. Just careful. Measured in a different way now. His mother adjusted her posture slightly. "You should have told us," she said. It wasn't criticism. It was discomfort. I met her gaze calmly. "I wanted to meet you as I am," I said. And for a moment she didn't respond. Because there wasn't an easy answer to that. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence settle naturally. Not filling it. Not guiding it. Just allowing it to exist. Because by then I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't trying to correct them. Or change their minds. I had simply stopped pretending. And that on its own had been enough. No one laughed this time. No one reached for the pie after that. The plates stayed where they were, half-finished slices untouched, whipped cream softening at the edges. Coffee cups cooled slowly in front of us. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was something else. A pause that asked everyone in the room to reconsider what they thought they understood. His father was the first to move. He cleared his throat lightly and adjusted his napkin, folding it once then again as if giving himself something to do. "Well," he said finally, his voice more measured than before, "that's quite an accomplishment." I nodded politely. "Thank you." There was no follow-up question. No deeper inquiry. Just a statement placed carefully between us like something fragile. His uncle leaned forward slightly, his earlier confidence replaced by curiosity that felt more cautious now. "How long have you been with the company?" he asked. "I founded it," I replied. Another pause. A longer one this time. He sat back, slowly processing that. "I see," he said. And for once he didn't try to add anything else. Across from me, his sister shifted in her seat. "That's impressive," she said. Her tone was softer now, stripped of the easy certainty she'd had earlier. I gave her a small smile. "It's been a long road." She nodded, though it was clear she didn't quite know where to place that information yet. His mother hadn't spoken. She sat with her hands folded neatly, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. But something in her expression had softened, not into warmth, but into something more reflective. "You've done well for yourself," she said at last. It wasn't praise. Not exactly. But it wasn't dismissal either. "Thank you," I said again. Simple. Enough. My fiancé was still looking at me. Not with shock anymore. But with something quieter. Something searching. "I don't understand," he said. "Why would you hide something like that?" The question wasn't about the job. It was about everything behind it. I turned slightly toward him. "I didn't hide it," I said. "I just didn't lead with it." He frowned slightly, trying to follow. "I wanted to be seen without it," I continued. "To know what that felt like." And he asked. The room stilled again, not because they were waiting, but because they couldn't help listening. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I answered. It was clear. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. He leaned back in his chair, slowly absorbing that. Not defensive. Not argumentative. Just quiet. His father spoke again, this time more carefully. I suppose he said choosing his words first impressions can be misleading. There was a weight to that sentence. Not quite an apology, but something close to acknowledgement. I met his eyes. They can be, I agreed. His mother exhaled softly, as if releasing something she hadn't realized she was holding. We may have made assumptions, she said. It was subtle. Carefully phrased. But it was there. I nodded. That happens, I said. No edge. No correction. Just acceptance. And that was when the shift became complete. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just quiet. The room adjusted around a new understanding. My fiancé leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. I should have said something, he said. It wasn't directed at the table. It was directed at me. I looked at him. You could have, I said gently. He nodded, his jaw tightening just a little. I didn't think he started, then stopped. I waited. I didn't think it mattered, he finished. There was honesty in that. And something else too. A realization forming. I held his gaze. It does, I said. Not sharply. Not accusing. Just true. He nodded again, slower this time. I see that now. Around us, the tension didn't disappear. But it changed. It softened into something more human. Less certain. Less fixed. His uncle cleared his throat again. Well, he said, attempting a lighter tone, I suppose we've been discussing your company all evening without realizing it. There was a faint smile in his voice. Not mocking. Not dismissive. Just acknowledging the situation. I allowed a small smile in return. It happens, I said. His sister let out a quiet breath. I feel like I should apologize, she said. The words came out more quickly than she expected, as if she hadn't planned to say them. I turned to her. You don't have to, I said. She shook her head slightly. I do, she said. We made assumptions. I considered that for a moment. Then I nodded. Thank you, I said. That was enough. His mother looked at me again, her expression more open now. You handled this. Very gracefully, she said. I met her gaze. I wasn't trying to handle anything, I replied. I was just listening. That seemed to land somewhere deeper than I expected. She didn't respond right away. My fiancé shifted in his seat again. Are you angry? He asked quietly. The question surprised me. Not because it was unreasonable, but because it hadn't crossed my mind. I thought about it. Then I shook my head. No, I said. He studied me as if trying to understand how that could be true. Why not? He asked. I paused. Because the answer mattered. Because now I understand, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. I reached for my glass again, taking a small sip. The water was cool now. Still. I think I should go, I said gently after a moment. Not abruptly. Just naturally. The evening had reached its end. My fiancé looked at me surprised. Already, he asked. I gave a small smile. It's been a long day. He nodded, though I could see he wanted to say more. Let me walk you out, he said. I stood smoothing my skirt lightly. His parents stood as well out of habit more than anything else. It was good to meet you, his father said. I nodded. You too. His mother stepped closer just slightly. I hope we can speak again, she said. There was something different in her tone now. Less certainty. More intention. I'm sure we will, I replied. At the door, my fiancé paused. The night air was cool, quiet. Different from the room we had just left. I'm sorry, he said. The words were simple. Unpolished. Real. I looked at him. And for a moment I saw the version of him I had met in that bookstore. The one who didn't know anything about me. The one who had simply been kind. I know, I said. And I did. But knowing something doesn't always change it. He hesitated. Can we talk? He asked. I nodded slowly. We will, I said. Not tonight. But not never. I stepped away from the porch, the sound of gravel soft beneath my shoes. He stayed where he was watching. Not calling after me. Not trying to stop me. Just thinking. And as I walked toward the car, one thought settled quietly in my mind. Some answers don't come from what people say. They come from what they allow. And what they choose not to see. Until it's right in front of them. Some answers don't come from words. They come from what people do when they think no one is watching. For 3 days after Thanksgiving, I didn't call him. Not because I wanted to punish him. Punishment is loud. It needs an audience. It needs someone to watch the other person hurt. That wasn't what I wanted. I simply needed quiet. So I went back to my apartment, back to my ordinary little routines. I made coffee in the same chipped blue mug I had used for years. I answered emails before sunrise. I reviewed contracts, approved budgets, and joined meetings where no one questioned whether I belonged at the table. At work, I was still the same person. Calm, decisive, certain. But at home, when the laptop closed and the apartment went still, I thought about that dinner. Not the money. Not the reveal. Not even the looks on their faces. I thought about silence. His silence. My silence. And how different the two had been. Mine had been a choice. His had been comfort. That difference mattered. On Sunday afternoon, he called. I let it ring twice before I answered. Hi, he said. His voice was softer than usual. Hi. A pause. I've been thinking, he said. I figured. He let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. I deserved that. I didn't answer. Because some things don't need softening. I talked to my parents, he continued. Really talked to them. That's good. My mother cried. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I was moved by the tears, but because I understood something about people. Sometimes shame comes before growth. And sometimes it comes before another performance. Time is what tells the difference. She said she didn't realize how she sounded, he said. I looked out the window at the quiet street below. I believe that I said, You do. Yes, I answered. Most people don't hear themselves until someone stops agreeing with them. He was quiet after that. We met 2 days later at the same bookstore where we first met. That was his idea. I almost said no. Then I remembered the man from the aisle, the one who had laughed gently and offered me the book first, the one I had trusted before money, family, and fear complicated everything. So I went. He was already there when I arrived, standing near the same section holding a book he wasn't reading. When he saw me, he didn't rush toward me. He just stood there for a second as if he finally understood that some doors don't open because you knock louder. They open because you approach differently. Thank you for coming, he said. I nodded. We walked to a small cafe next door and sat by the window. No Thanksgiving table. No polished silver. No audience. Just 2 cups of coffee and the truth. I failed you, he said. The words surprised me because they were not polished, not rehearsed. They were plain. And plain words, when honest, can be powerful. You did, I said gently. He nodded, accepting it. I thought staying quiet kept the peace, he said. But it didn't. It just protected me from being uncomfortable. That was the first thing he said that made me feel something soften. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But possibility. He told me he had spent years trying not to disappoint his parents. That he had learned to laugh at things he didn't find funny, agree with things he didn't fully believe, and let comments pass because challenging them made the room cold. I didn't think of myself as weak, he said. I thought I was being practical. I stirred my coffee slowly. Practical can become cowardly if you use it long enough, I said. He looked down. I know. There was no defense in him this time. That mattered. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. Can we fix this? I looked at him for a long moment. Outside, an older couple crossed the street slowly, hand in hand. They didn't hurry. They moved like people who had learned that time was not something to race, but something to honor. I don't know, I said. His face changed, but he didn't interrupt. I care about you, I continued, but I can't marry someone who only stands beside me after he knows what I'm worth. He swallowed hard. I understand. I need to see who you become when no one is impressed, I said, when there is nothing to gain, when speaking up costs you something. He nodded. That's fair. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I believed he meant it. We didn't end the engagement that day, but we didn't pretend everything was fine either. I took off the ring and placed it gently on the table between us. His eyes lowered to it. This isn't forever, I said, and it isn't revenge. He looked back up at me. It's a pause. A pause, I said, until trust has somewhere real to stand. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. And that quiet acceptance told me more than any apology could have. A few weeks later, his mother sent me a handwritten note. Not an email. Not a text. A note. The handwriting was careful, slightly uneven. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for another chance. She simply wrote that she had confused manners with character and comfort with kindness. At the bottom, she wrote one line I kept reading. I am learning that respect offered late is still better than pride kept forever. I placed the note in a drawer. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. People can change. But only when they stop explaining long enough to listen. Months passed. He and I moved slowly. Some dinners, some honest conversations, some painful ones. His family changed slowly too. Not perfectly. Real change is rarely smooth. But one evening his mother invited me for dinner again. This time when I arrived there were no tests hidden inside compliments. No careful questions meant to place me. She opened the door, looked me in the eyes and said, I'm glad you came. That was all. And somehow it was enough for that night. I never regretted pretending to be poor. Not because it exposed them, but because it revealed something all of us needed to see. Money can open doors. Titles can change voices. Success can make people suddenly polite. But none of those things create real respect. They only reveal who was waiting for a reason to give it. That Thanksgiving didn't end with shouting. It didn't end with revenge served cold across a polished table. It ended quietly, with people sitting with what they had done, and learning slowly that dignity doesn't need to announce itself. It only needs to remain standing. If this story made you think of someone who was judged too quickly, share it with them. And if you believe respect should never depend on money, status, or appearances, stay with us for more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the lessons people learn when the truth finally sits down at the table.